What is going on, everybody? Right now we are going to be taking a look at the iPhone SE and comparing it to the Galaxy S7 and seeing which one you should buy in 2018 if it's between the two. Now I'm going to get this out of the way. If you want a bigger phone, go for the S7, but if you want a smaller phone, get the iPhone SE. But if you're kind of conflicted and you don't know whether you want a bigger phone or you want a smaller phone, this is pretty much what this video is about. Now, one interesting thing to note is that these phones came out the same year and around the same time as well. Technically, the iPhone SE is about 1 month newer than the Galaxy S7, but really in comparison, they both almost came out around the same time. Now, in terms of the body, the Galaxy S7 definitely has a much better feeling body than the iPhone SE, but that doesn't mean the iPhone SE's body is horrible either. I feel like the S7 does have the edge here, no pun intended, because it does have a glass back where the SE doesn't, and I like the feeling of a glass back. It really adds much more value to a phone in terms of holding it and everything, but I think in practical sense the iPhone SE is probably better because if you drop it you don't have to worry about the glass on the back. Even though the iPhone SE does have glass on the top and the bottom, I will say about 20% of the back is glass on the iPhone SE, but really the S7 does feel better. They both have home buttons. The iPhone SE does have a 4-inch screen IPS panel where the S7 has a 5.1-inch Super AMOLED screen, and that panel is 1440p where the iPhone SE is a 640p, and the S7 screen is much better. I really like that. It's AMOLED, so you can't really go wrong with it, but the only thing that is bad about an AMOLED screen is that sometimes you do get burn-in, which could be a problem for a lot of people. For me, I hate burn-in, but I also like AMOLED screens, so really it's a trade-off you have to look at. IPS panels are decent, but really there's no comparison between the two. The S7 screen is much better. Now, going a little bit further, I do want to preface this next section by saying Android and iOS are completely different operating systems. So just because on paper a iPhone does have lower specs than a counterpart of an Android, it doesn't necessarily mean it's slower. Most of the time it could mean that the phone is faster, but it just depends on what phones you're comparing. And in this sense, in terms of software, the Galaxy S7 started off getting Android Marshmallow, and it is upgradable to Android 8.0, but I don't think it's going to be getting Android 9.0, but don't quote me on it. It might, but I don't think it will. The iPhone SE, however, started off getting the last part of iOS 9, so got iOS 9.3.2, and right now it is upgradable to 11.4.1, and once iOS 12 comes out, it's getting that, and a couple more versions of iOS after that too. I made a whole separate video talking about how long the iPhone SE is going to last, so if you're planning on keeping a phone stock, I would probably go for the iPhone SE, but in terms of the Galaxy S7, you are able to root it and throw a custom ROM on it, and I'll tell you right now, from my viewpoint, if I were to get the S7 right now, I would 100% root it and ROM it because I am comfortable doing something like that, but you might not, so that is something that you would probably have to keep that, ask yourself, go in the bathroom and look yourself in the mirror and just ask yourself, are you comfortable rooting and ROMing a phone? And depending on what you say, that might shift your opinion on what phone you're going to get. But in terms of the specs, the iPhone SE has the Apple A9 chip, has a dual-core processor clocked at 1.84 GHz and 2 GB of RAM. With the Galaxy S7 has the Exynos 8890 Octa, has an octa-core processor clocked at 2.3 GHz and 4 GB of RAM. And on paper, the Galaxy S7 is about twice as fast, but I don't necessarily see it that way. The Galaxy S7 might have a little bit of an advantage in terms of the speed because it does have 2 more gigabytes of RAM, and I do think overall it is faster. I'm not going to beat around the bush, but I do think the iPhone SE isn't slow either. I feel like these phones could both be fast without having one, being completely slow and the other one being completely fast. If the Galaxy S7 was like 100%, the iPhone SE is probably around like an 85%, maybe 87% on a good day. But you have to keep in mind this too, and I don't know if this is proven or not, but because the S7 has a bigger screen and it's higher res, sometimes it might be a little bit harder for the processor to push those pixels in order to, put a picture up or change things in a game. But I don't really have problems with either in terms of performance, but I do think the S7 is a little bit faster. And that's pretty much where I'm going to leave it at that before it gets really messy. We're going to switch to the cameras now. They both actually have 12 megapixel cameras, which is pretty interesting. I do think the Galaxy S7s, just as a whole, is a little bit better. They both almost have the same exact specs in terms of the camera modules and everything. The front camera does have 5 megapixels on the Galaxy S7, where on the iPhone SE it's only 1.2 megapixels. But even with that being said, I do think overall the iPhone SE's front camera is pretty decent. But the back cameras aren't that bad either. You are able to shoot 4K videos on both, 1080p videos at 60 frames per second, but you are able to shoot 1080p videos at 120 frames per second on the iPhone SE, where you cannot do that on the Galaxy S7. So depending on how you feel, that might be something that kind of offends you and rub you the wrong way. So I'm just going to leave it at that. Now, both these phones still have fingerprint sensors, so there's no Face ID or anything like that. So you do have to unlock your phone that way. So there's no extra sensors on the front. So just keep that in mind. Now, in terms of battery life, this is something that is kind of subjective because on paper, again, the SE has half the amount of battery space as the Galaxy S7. The iPhone SE has a 1624 mAh battery, where the Galaxy S7 has a 3000 mAh battery. And if you're just looking at the specs, you would just assume that the S7's battery is twice as good, but that is not the case at all. You have to remember the Galaxy S7 is very spec'd. It's spec'd very, very high. It has a huge screen. The screen is resed higher, and it's operating Android, which sometimes I don't want to give flack to Android. I love Android and everything. It's no lie, Android does suck up more power than iOS, and standby time isn't too good either. And because the battery probably has deteriorated equally on both, you kind of have to subject that in and everything. I do think that the iPhone SE has a better overall battery life than the Galaxy S7. And when I say overall battery life, I'm not just including like just when using the phone or screen on time, but I'm also including standby time. And I do think the iPhone SE has better standby time in that case because iOS does operate like that better. It gives you much better standby time and all of that. So in that case, I will say standby time and overall battery life is better on the iPhone SE than the Galaxy S7. Now, some other notable things to note, like I said, both of them do have fingerprint sensors, but I do kind of prefer Touch ID over the Android counterpart. I don't know why. I don't necessarily even have any problems with the Android fingerprint sensor market or anything. I just think that Touch ID is just so easy and is so much better. And I think early on I had problems with Android fingerprint sensors, but they've probably fixed them since then. But I do think Touch ID is just much better. The iPhone SE does only have Touch ID 1. It doesn't have the updated version, but really there's not too much of a difference between the two. The Touch ID 2 is much better, but Touch ID 2 is a little bit better, but it's not like 300,000 times better or anything. Both these phones do have headphone jacks, but they also have Bluetooth, so you can connect AirPods on the iPhone SE and Galaxy S7. I think you can connect AirPods. I don't know. The screen is AMOLED. You also have removable storage on the Galaxy S7, where on the iPhone SE you do not, and that might not be a good thing for you. You might not like that, but that is something you just kind of have to keep in mind when looking at. It doesn't really necessarily offend me or anything. The iPhone SE you can get, I think, up to 128 gigabytes. The Galaxy S7 you can get on like 32 gigabytes or something. You can get the lowest version that it has, save some money, and just spend that money on like a 256 gigabyte SD card and just recoup that memory just that way. So really there's some rubbing room you have there. I like the Galaxy S7 in terms of that, but really, this is kind of a strange one because you have a phone that is a flagship on one hand, and on the other hand, it's the budget iPhone, but specs and everything say one thing, but in terms of using it, it kind of tells you a different story. And if it was me, and if I was choosing between an iPhone SE or a Galaxy S7 in 2018, I would probably go for the Galaxy S7, mostly because the screen, I like a bigger phone, but even that, I would just get this phone and I would root it and ROM it immediately. And like I said before, that is a big part on whether you should get a phone like this or not. And I say the same thing if you were going to get like a Nexus 5 or some throwback phone like that, or even like a Galaxy S3 or a Galaxy S4. I would only get those phones if I were, and use them as daily drivers, if I was planning on rooting it or ROMing it, because it just unlocks so much more for your phone. And this phone isn't too outdated. Really, that's the biggest thing the iPhone SE has over the Galaxy S7 is that it has more updates and everything like that. It's going to be lasting longer technically than the Galaxy S7, but it doesn't have to be that way if you do root or ROM your phone. And that's kind of what it comes down to. I wouldn't necessarily say the S7 is a 300 times better phone or anything like that. Technically speaking, the Galaxy S7 is more expensive to buy than the iPhone SE, but iPhones do tend to hold their value and prices better than the S7. By the time the next Galaxy phone comes out, these phones will probably be less than $100, maybe, I don't know, but they're going to be around that price range. So I mean, right now I'll leave links in the description if you want to pick either one of these up. You can't really go wrong getting either of these phones, but what I will say is get the Galaxy S7 if you don't already have a bias towards iOS. But if you do need an iPhone for any reason, the iPhone SE is a very good phone too. I've done reviews on it and everything, and I can tell you the iPhone SE you can't go wrong with, and you can't really go wrong with the Galaxy S7 if you plan on rooting it or ROMing it. And guys, that is pretty much it. If you have any questions or anything like that, leave it down in the comment section below. Hit that like button, that'll mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. We are still giving away an iPhone 6s and an iPhone SE as well, so if you want to get an iPhone SE without paying for it, now would be a perfect chance. And I'll be picking a winner in the next couple weeks, but in order to enter, all you have to do is subscribe to the channel and follow me on Twitter and Instagram. Both those links are down in the description, so make sure you guys enter that. Also check out the other links down there too, that'll mean so much. But more importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys, and hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.